Hello and welcome to Coconut Chats, everyone. Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you get a lot of insight out of what we've got to talk about. Today, you've got me, Harita, and I'm joined with my friend Chris. How are you, Chris?
Hey, Harita, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Today, we've got yet another amazing guest. Prachi Vaish is a licensed clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and a certified clinical trauma specialist. She's been working in the field of mental health for over 15 years, and she's the founder of the Emotional Wellness Initiative, a venture that provides niche mental health and wellness services, and so much more, which she's going to talk about in this episode. Hi, Prachi, how are you?
Hey Harita, I'm good. Hi Chris.
Hey, Prachi, nice to have you here and thank you for doing this with us.
It's my pleasure.
So, first things first, Prachi, can you tell us what led you to work in this field?
I get asked this a lot of times, and I honestly do not have like a story for this. But honestly, I think this has always been my calling. I have been studying psychology since 1997. That was the first time I started studying it in class 11th. And it's been so many years so far, and there's not been a single day where I've felt like I should have been doing something else. So the deeper I got into this field, the more interested I became, and it just felt like a very natural thing for me to do. And today, my profession is very much a part of who I am. And it's very hard for me to, look at myself without thinking of myself as a therapist. It's a very closely interwoven part of my identity. So what got me working, I really don't know, but it's the field itself, it's the working with people, and I've always had an affinity for people's stories. That's what keeps me staying here.
That's so nice to hear. We're interested in your work with women that are going through postpartum depression. I know that's one part of the work that you do. Can you tell us about how you've helped women and also couples navigate this very difficult time in their lives?
Right. Postpartum depression is actually, now I'm glad it's being talked about a lot and recognized as much, because it wasn't so until a few years ago, and a lot of women go through it and it's just dismissed as something which is, oh, it just happens, and don't worry about it and think positive. But postpartum depression is a very real condition that severely affects a mother, and also consequently a mother and child bond. See, any big life event is a period of transition that requires realignment of beliefs, skills, and coping methods. We usually think that since marriage, childbirth, etc., are such taken for granted processes, that everyone should be kind of pre-programmed to deal with them. But that doesn't happen. And the media also doesn't help by painting a very rosy picture of life transitions like this. So when reality hits, it's quite a shock. And suddenly you realize that, taking care of a baby is not just lovely cooing and babbling sounds, and it's not just, all happy, cozy moments. It's a lot of work. And because your body has just gone through a major transition itself, you are physically also exhausted, your body is also coping, and then mentally you have to cope with so many other aspects of childbirth and parenting. And suddenly you start to realize that there are so many issues that crop up with your partner, and especially in an Indian setting, there's the whole family involved, there are in-laws to deal with and your own parents to deal with, because from the time you become pregnant, everybody has advice to give you, and you really don't know which one to follow and which one to not follow.
Yeah.
So when the baby comes, it's just this bombardment of advice, and then everybody assuming that you're not competent at what you are about to do. takes a toll mentally, and the woman doesn't get time to listen to her own body and listen to her own maternal instincts about the baby. Like I hear so many women who come up and say that, oh, you know, when the baby was born and they brought me the baby in the hospital, I didn't have that magical moment. Like I've seen in movies, or you know, where people talk about that, oh my God, the moment I set sights on my child, all the pain was worth it and everything was gone, and I didn't experience that, so something's wrong with me. But honestly, it rarely happens like that. You are so exhausted that all you want to do is sleep at that moment. You don't want to look at your baby, and that's absolutely normal. But nobody talks about these things. Breastfeeding, for example, people think that it should come very readily to you, but it's a very complex process, involves a lot of factors. And a lot of women struggle with it, but they don't want to, they cannot talk about it, because when they talk about it, they feel like something's lacking in me. So all of these factors do contribute to postpartum depression, and you can't talk about it to elders because you feel like everyone else has their life together, and you don't. And surprisingly, older women who have already gone through childbirth and pregnancy, they also forget how much they struggled at their time when they are talking to a new mom.
Yeah.
You know, they also become very coming from a very high ground that, oh, you know what, it's okay, and you'll get through this. Oh, you don't know how to do this. This is very simple. But you just forget that you've also gone through that. So it becomes a very different scenario to deal with sensory input coming from all sides and all kinds of emotions bubbling. So I try to help them in 3 stages. If possible, if they can get intervention in time, then I first start with prepartum interventions, where while the pregnancy is on, I coach the mothers on their beliefs about parenting, how they feel about it, you know, eliciting those beliefs, and then giving them a more neutral and a more realistic perspective on what is to come. I also, in a prepartum phase, sometimes deal with couples together and get them aligned on the parenting process, because usually this is not something that couples do together. Talk about how we are going to bring up the child together. The whole pregnancy phase is spent mostly dreaming up, oh, how wonderful it is going to be when the baby comes, and how, you know, close we are going to get together, and how lovely it is going to be. But we don't actually get to the ground rules of parenting practices. So I help them, you know, in that neutral setting to, you know, bring out their own beliefs about parenting, the models that they have picked up from their respective families, and then help them find a middle ground of what you are going to do with your child. So this is a prepartum phase. Then the postpartum phase, that once immediately the baby has come, I provide them a safe space to just come and vent and be themselves. And it's mostly supportive work, where they can find a non-judgmental space. They can also do a lot of brainstorming themselves without the outside interference of so much advice coming in, and figure out for themselves that, okay, right now this is what I'm feeling, and what can I do for my baby? Because so that she can get the space to follow her own instincts as a mother, rather than getting confused by all the advice that's coming in. And then sometimes people don't go for intervention in these phases, and then it's the postpartum stage, where the baby has maybe grown a few months, and suddenly the couple is realizing that we are having problems, we are fighting all the time, we are not able to see eye to eye, we've lost the physical intimacy between us, or you know, there's a conflict happening vis-a-vis the in-laws, and how the mother wants to bring up the baby and how they want to bring up the baby. So this is probably, usually it's at this stage when parents do come for intervention and say that we don't know what's happened since the baby has been born. So this is like the postpartum phase where I can intervene.
Prachi, before we move on to the next part, just a quick question about what you said, that, you know, that it's not a rosy moment like we see in televisions or all that. In your experience, what do you reckon, which pregnancy is akin to having more PPD? The pregnancy that was forced, or the pregnancy that happened naturally? Like, or both of them have equal chances of getting PPD?
Using common sense, I would like to say that the pregnancy that was unplanned or forced. But also it's a very complex situation, because sometimes even people who say that they've experienced a naturally planned pregnancy don't realize that a lot of times it happens because of societal pressure. Like you're constantly on this clock that, oh, I've been married for 2 years, by now I should have had a baby.
Yeah.
So I should have a baby. So they don't really realize whether they are mentally ready or not. So sometimes even the pregnancies that look planned are not really planned by the mother herself. There's a lot of other factors which are intervening. So by that logic, anybody can have equal chances of succumbing to postpartum depression, because previous vulnerabilities also make a difference. You know, how you are as a personality, how you got your coping mechanisms in place throughout life, other foundations, all of that makes a difference.
And sorry, I'm cutting you short again, but I really want to know about this. You've talked to so many couples, right? When you talk to these couples, what is the husband's contribution, or how does the husband contribute into the bigger picture?
That's a very good question. I was talking about this to someone else also a couple of months ago, that fathers have the potential to be really involved in parenting and childbirth. Somehow it doesn't translate on ground like that. And also, you know, the woman is the mother, so she has the natural instincts. And as a father, evolutionarily, they have the protective instincts. They have the provider instincts. So it would work best if both people could use their evolutionary instincts to give input into the parenting process. But usually what I observe happens is that the women will expect the fathers to take care of the child the way they do, which is not going to happen unless you give them specific instructions that this is how it is to be done. And if the first time it doesn't go well, the father is usually dismissed, or, you know, told that, oh, you know what, you leave it, I'll take care of it, you don't know how to do this. So that also serves to cut the fathers off sometimes. And then they also feel hesitant volunteering the next time for help, because they think that, what's the point, I'm just going to be criticized, or I don't know how to do this. Whereas if you leave the children with the fathers, most of the time they're able to take care of them, nothing happens, nothing dangerous happens.
But you know what happens, Prachi, like we are overseas, here it's a common norm, so your gynac will encourage your husband to be in the delivery room, so he witnesses that brilliant moment, also we are told. But I've heard that this faces a lot of rejection or a lot of resistance when it comes to an Indian hospital. Either the doctor will not allow you, or your in-laws, or your family. So do you think that moment also somewhere helps the father getting automatically involved just because he's witnessing that moment, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. But having the father present for the birth, and, you know, it makes him a willing and a very involved participant in the birth process itself. So the disconnect is not there. It's not like, you know, your wife went inside and then suddenly she came back with this human being which you've never seen before. You actually saw the human being born, you know, you were there assisting. That makes you a very, very involved participant, and that definitely helps to create a larger bond.
No, amazing. All right, Harita, moving on.
Yeah, so I think that leads us quite well into our next question. A topic that a lot of Indians don't want to talk about is about marital intimacy in their relationship. So in your time in this profession, what types of situations have you come across, and what type of advice do you give to your clients?
That's very true. We don't talk about marital intimacy unless it has reached a stage of crisis. And the reason we don't talk about, in my opinion, are two primary reasons. One, in this country, and to a certain extent overall also, we think that intimacy equals only sex. And the second reason is that we feel that emotional love and physical lust are two mutually exclusive or different things. And there is this general idea that once you become a wife or a mother, sometimes somehow, you know, pursuing lust makes the love contaminated somehow or impure. You know, you're suddenly put at this pedestal where you're not supposed to indulge in lustful behavior. Okay. So that, and that is why you will find there's a lot of drift that happens in couples after childbirth. Because I think even for the men, because of this conditioning, it is very hard to look at their wife as a sexual partner minus the mother role. So it tends to impact the marital intimacy a lot. Intimacy is on a continuum. It has to flow smoothly between love and lust. And you need not keep pure love aside when having sex. And also one need not compartmentalize sex only to keep it behind closed doors. Marital intimacy involves being connected at all levels all the time. Very simple example being that if you want to grab each other's behind while leaving for work, you tend to snap their hands away and saying, oh my god, this is not the time to do it. But because you feel a little embarrassed and it feels a little out of context because it's not happening in the bedroom. But instead, if you would just lean into the moment and embrace it for what it is and just give each other the response that is supposed to be given to a warranted sexual advance, it is going to bring the connection that much deeper. So the problems occur because we start compartmentalizing these things. When you're dating, you don't compartmentalize. You will be on the phone for 3 hours overnight and you will be flowing very smoothly from emotional conversations to sexual conversations also, and it doesn't feel odd.
Yeah.
But somehow, there's this stereotype that gets triggered, the switch that gets flipped when you are married and moving on into the elevator of life, with children and all of that you just start compartmentalizing these things that, oh, sex is only supposed to be here and love is supposed to be here and this is how maternal love is supposed to be, and all of that just becomes a big series of boxes.
But Prachi, when you talk to your clients, like I've recently addressed this issue before on another panel, somewhere where we face a lot of rejection or hindrances, the concept of consent, right? Like we don't know the concept of consent, which leads to marital rape. So how does one distinguish between marital intimacy and marital rape? Because there's a very thin line, as far as I understand. You are the expert, you tell us. So if a husband comes to you and tells you, oh, Prachi, I was just trying to be intimate with my wife, what's wrong? So how do you explain the concept of consent? Like to be intimate, you need that consent.
That's an amazing question, Chris. I'm glad you brought that out. Because like you said, consent is a foreign concept to most people. Even women a lot of times don't know that consent can be withdrawn at any stage of sexual intimacy. Even after penetration has occurred, she can always change her mind and say that I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
But it's very hard for people to digest. Even for the woman to verbalize it, it's very difficult sometimes because she says that, oh, if I do this now, I'm just going to turn him off or something's going to happen. So you're coming back to your question about marital intimacy versus marital rape. Intimacy is two people. Always. That's the simplest distinction. That if two people are not in it, it's not intimacy. It's some kind of manipulation or forcefulness.
Yeah.
So if you are trying to, if you're trying to get her to sleep with you and she's not really saying no, but she's not really saying yes either, and she's saying things like, I'm really tired, or, I'm not in the mood, or I don't feel good right now. And then you try to use guilt to make that happen, that, oh, you know what, I've been waiting for so long and this is not done and you're not supposed to do this, you've changed, and then she gives in. That's not intimacy.
So would you still call that abuse, where she is forced in?
It's manipulation. Definitely. Abuse, it gets to the level of, so abuse sometimes festers. Most of the times abuse doesn't happen like straight away 100% in your face.
Yeah.
It festers. So over a period of time, if you have felt like you are having to suppress your needs in the relationship all the time, or if the other person is constantly using manipulation or constantly using body shaming, constantly using tactics to get you to sleep with them, then it is definitely moving towards emotional abuse. There's no doubt. Any kind of coercion or manipulation is emotional abuse. But it takes a long time for people to recognize that, because even the person who's doing it sometimes doesn't realize that I'm manipulating her. He thinks that this is my right, or this is what I need, and she should be taking care of my needs because she's my partner. He doesn't realize that he's indulging into manipulation.
I have two questions for you, Prachi. One is for my own knowledge and the other is just general. You know, Indians have this habit, or should I say a weird habit, that the minute the child is born, the child has to sleep in the middle of the parents all in the same room. A lot of people don't tend to get, a lot of people differ over this Indianized and Westernized concept of child rearing. So we would like to know your views. Does having a child in the same room reduce your level of intimacy with your partner? And the other question that I have is, I often ask this question to people I'm maybe dating or seeing to, you know, kind of as a prospective alliance. I ask them that, you know, define the difference between making love and having sex. 9 out of 10 men have told me there is no difference, it's all the same. And mind you, 9 out of 10 men were from the Indian subcontinent. What are your views on both the questions?
Okay, so I'll address the first one first about the co-sleeping. I don't honestly advocate any particular way, because then I always tell parents, go with your instincts, do what feels right when it comes to co-sleeping. And the reason that we believe that intimacy will be affected because of co-sleeping is, again, going back to what I was saying, by compartmentalizing sexual intimacy. So you think that I can only be sexually intimate with my partner on this bed. So now if the baby has come in, again, you know, that whole psychological process of now this becoming a sacred space and, you know, cannot be contaminated by sexual thoughts starts to come into play, and it automatically starts to take a toll. And obviously, you know, if the baby is there, the baby has needs at night, and, you know, all that definitely has an impact. It doesn't have to impact your sexual intimacy if you are able to, again, get the intimacy in a flow instead of just confining it to that particular bed. You can have sex anywhere in the house. Yes, if you're living with a joint family, I understand in an Indian scenario that becomes very, very difficult. But it's not impossible. It's not the baby is not in the room with you the whole time.
Yeah.
You can still, you don't have to have sex only at night. You can have sex any time of the day also, when you have the room to yourself. But you have to, you know, get that idea out of your mind that somehow these relationships are not going along with lust. Lust is seen as a dirty thing and it seems to contaminate everything. That idea has to be done away with, and then everything can just flow.
Yeah.
And your other question about having sex and making love, it again depends on the two people who are engaged in it. You can definitely, and any gender can definitely engage in a physical intercourse, a sexual intercourse, without having emotions involved. And they can also take it to the next level by having emotions involved, and then it becoming a very, very very intense, immersive experience. Sex by itself is a very moving experience, no matter whether your emotions are involved or they are not involved. If you're doing it right, you will come out on the other end feeling really good. So I would say that, you know, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day if you're having sex or if you're making love, as long as both of you are coming out feeling good at the other end of the act.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess another question I've got that's not related to this, but I know something that you actually took part in recently, or that you organized. You organized a women's only retreat in Goa. So what led you to organizing this, and how did the women feel after this retreat?
You've really asked my favorite question, Anita. The idea for this retreat has been in my mind for the last 6 years as a basic vibe that I wanted to create. I didn't have all the details in my mind straightened out yet, but for the last 6-7 years, I've thought about this vibe that I wanted to create for women, because almost 98% of my clients are women. And the one common thing that I observe is that their light just gets blurred over the years as they go through life. It just dims, because they have to either put up with societal expectations, or they have gone through a series of relationships where they were not valued for who they were, and that leaves a very lasting impact. And every little event that we go through in life leaves scars, and if we don't heal them properly, they do end up impacting the next relationship we enter into, or the next step that we want to take in life, whether it is a career choice, whether it is a relationship, or any decision also. So this was the space that I wanted to create. So the retreat is a specifically designed healing retreat for especially new age women who want to really explore and get to know themselves, so that they can form healthier, happier connections and still feel self-sufficient. If you don't know yourself, you will never know what you want from other people. First, you have to figure out what it is that you want, and then see who aligns with that. We work during, it's about 3 days, and we work on self-exploration, we work on trauma healing, we work on boundary setting, and we work on reconnecting with our inner light in a safe, non-judgmental space. The focus is a lot on reawakening the feminine energy and realizing that feminine and masculine exists in everyone, but we tend to somehow, the way the society is designed, we tend to give more importance to masculine qualities. That quality to conquer, and the quality to like protect and provide, and just charge forward. Those are masculine energy qualities. They are very effective when you're in a professional space, but in a personal space, if you're not true to your energy qualities, then you tend to feel like a misfit. You tend to feel like I'm not doing something right, or this doesn't feel like it's supposed to feel. So the idea is to recognize the difference between the both energies, and then getting in touch with your feminine energy and realizing that that too is extremely powerful when used in the right spaces, and identifying with what your feminine energy looks like, and knowing that there is tremendous power in nurture, in healing space, in this ability to even feel emotions so intuitively and deeply as compared to the other gender. So the idea is that space, and I will do this twice a year now, because we've had a tremendous response to the first one. And we had a mother-daughter duo attending the first one, where the mother was 51 years old, and that's the age where she's starting to revamp her entire outlook to life. And she's really reawakening herself, and she was so amazing, and she would talk about how she used to be judgmental about other people, and now how her eyes are opening because of the exposure. And it was a beautiful experience to have someone of that age group. So we there is absolutely no age barrier for a woman who wants to get in touch with her feminine energy and who wants to awaken that light which has just dimmed over the years. There's like every moment is a perfect moment to want to do that.
That's so nice. So how many women came to this retreat?
There were 8 of us, and I do not want to exceed more than 10 to 12 in any batch, because this is a very, very intense work that we do. Every session is, although it is a group session, it is extremely intense and personalized and personally connected. So I like to be able to give personal attention to each person, and the group has to be very intimate and safe. So any larger than maybe 12 or maximum 15, and then the energy just scatters. So we have to keep it extremely intimate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for sharing about all your work experience and all the types of things you've come across. It was such a pleasure to have you talking to us today, Prachi.
Thank you, Harita.
For all our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. As always, we'll be uploading this episode on our Facebook channel and also our YouTube channel. And if you have any comments or any topics for future episodes, you can always get in touch with us on Facebook, or you can email us at coconutchats@gmail.com. Otherwise, we will see you all next time. Bye, Chris. Bye, Prachi. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Harita. Bye, Chris. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure being here, and it was a lovely conversation.
Likewise.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.